So very dangerous.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very dangerous.
Knives are very scary. And you got to assume if somebody chooses a knife as their primary weapon, that they must be very proficient with it.
Yeah.
And if somebody's really proficient with a knife, I know I'm not. And I know I've seen pictures of people that have tried to defend against knife attacks, and it doesn't usually work out very well. So again, distance is your friend in that particular instance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is really true, which leads me to another, or the last part of our discussion is about civilian self-defense. Okay, just for our viewers, United States of America has different states, and I know many Europeans know that it's federal, but look guys, United States is like Europe. Let's say France, compare France to California, for example. Compare Germany to Illinois. Please do not compare Germany to USA. USA
Right.
is a huge, powerful country. That's a very European mistake. You cannot compare Germany to USA. You can compare again Germany to Illinois, Germany to California. And based on that, United States has different sets of laws. Excuse me, Rich, I'm just explaining.
No, you're correct. Absolutely. 100%.
Right. So they are different. You know, for example, I'm not only talking about culture. You know, for example, if you go to Florida, California, or you go to where Rich lives, or where I studied, Wisconsin, or so, every state has a different type of culture. Also legislation. That's extremely important to understand. So it brings us back to what I wanted to say regarding self-defense. Could you tell us about how self-defense is regarded and interpreted on federal level or on a state level, like the state you are in Georgia? Could you please tell us?
Yeah, the federal guidelines come from the Constitution, from the Supreme Court, and they're a little more broad than most of the state guidelines. The state guidelines can, in some cases, be more restrictive, as long as they're not infringing on the citizens' rights. And so in the southeastern region where I am, and a lot in the Midwest, like you said earlier, the laws are probably some of the most liberal that we have. Very few restrictions, but we do have restrictions. And you go to California or New York, and things that you can get away with in Georgia or Alabama, you can't get away with, because you have to have more permits to own certain types of weapons, and you have to allow bad guys an escape route sometimes. You can't defend yourself. You have to flee first, things of that nature. But specifically in Georgia, where would you like to start as far as that goes?
For example, let's put it this way. First of all, let's start with this, because I know it's different from the United States, from state to state. Can I carry a gun on me concealed?
Yes. In a fairly large number of states, you can. And the permitting process is either more or less restrictive depending on the state. I can't really speak to all of the different state laws, and even the ones in Georgia, they change from time to time. And because they're written by people who oftentimes don't understand firearms, then sometimes they seem kind of silly. But currently in Georgia, to carry a weapon, which even some knives fall into the category of weapon, out in public, you're required to have a permit. But the police aren't allowed to ask you to prove that you have a permit just because you have the weapon, which seems a little backwards to me, but it is what it is. So if I see a guy walking down the street with a pistol, I'm not permitted, based solely on the fact that he has the pistol, to go up and ask him for a permit.
Ah, I see.
I have to have some suspicion that he's doing something wrong.
I see. Okay. So then, okay, you need a permission. And what are the requirements to obtain this permission or the permit to carry?
Most of the permits, you go in, you have to go to the county level court system, and they have an application. They take your fingerprints, and they basically make sure that you have not done anything in the past that prohibits you from owning or possessing a firearm, and they do a complete background criminal history check and all that. When it comes back, they issue you the permit. Our permits, if I remember right, are still good for 5 years. The state of Georgia also recognizes any other state's weapons carry permits, provided that you are following our laws while you're here, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So, like I say, it's not difficult. It's a little time consuming for your first permit. But after that, the process is fairly smooth. I think it takes a few months to get your first one. And then your renewals are a little bit easier because you're already in their system and it's easier for them to do your checks.
And Rich, just to make sure, criminal record, what does it mean? Means no criminal record at all, correct? Nothing. What does it mean?
You can't have, you're going to put me on the spot because I don't have it memorized quite yet. But typically it would be any crimes involving violence or drugs. Okay. And those are probably the biggest ones. Any felony, which is any crime that's punishable by more than $1,000 fine or more than a year in jail or both.
Okay.
So felony would disqualify you.
It includes, for example, embezzlement, white-collar crime. It includes fraud. Yeah, of course, because these are also serious crimes, right?
But, DUI, driving under the influence, or some kind of misdemeanor, public intoxication, something like that won't prohibit you from being able to get a weapons permit.
Okay. So, but according to the American law, because I'm asking it because in Europe it's different, according to American law, if someone committed a crime and a felony, so of course he doesn't get a permit to carry the gun, but can he have guns at his home?
Not legally.
Exactly. That's
and I'm pretty sure that's consistent state to state. That once you have a felony conviction, your right to own firearms is null and void. And at that point, if you get caught with a firearm, it's another felony. But of course, it doesn't mean people don't do it. They do it all the time. But without getting into specifics, I'd say that's probably pretty accurate.
Okay. So could you please explain to us, also to our viewers, I'm sure Americans know that, but Europeans or Australians, Canadians, what is or other nations who watch our channel, what is the difference between open carry and concealed carry? I mean,
the legal definition in our state has changed a little bit over the years, but open carry is basically it's fully open and exposed to view to the general public. My personal opinion is that if you're not a uniformed police officer, open carry is rather foolish because it starts arguments, it makes you a target, it does all sorts of things that I don't think a person with common sense would do. But at the same time, because it is enshrined in the Constitution as one of those unalienable rights, then people feel the need to, do that, and that's their business. Concealed carry is what I prefer. That's when obviously no one, at least the average person, would not be able to look at you and tell that you're armed. And so that's the state you'll find me in most often.
Okay, and Rich, please help me. Is it like open carry? Do you need a permit to do that, or you don't need a permit to do that?
In certain circumstances and certain locations, you would need a permit, but in other places, like private property, places where you have permission to be, provided that you are not provided you are not prevented by law from having one, then yeah, you can open carry without a permit in certain places, but again, I don't think it's a very good idea.
Yeah. Okay, I understand. Now let's come to self-defense as a civilian. You are in a dangerous situation as a civilian, and you decide to defend yourself. You have a permit, right? Mm-hmm. You pull your gun and defend yourself and shoot, let's say, a criminal or someone who wants to attack you, the attacker. What happens? Could you tell us what happens according to American law?
It's going to change depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. Some jurisdictions are more hostile towards people using deadly force in self-defense than other places are. But as a general rule, if a reasonable person would be in fear for their life under the same circumstances that you were in, then deadly force is justified. That's the easiest way to kind of boil that down. It doesn't mean that because you're scared, you had a right to use deadly force. It means that a reasonable person would have been scared for their lives. So if, a person breaking in your front door at 3 o'clock in the morning in a very violent way, perhaps even, yelling threats or armed with some type of a weapon, a normal, reasonable person would be in fear for their life under that circumstance.
Of course.
And so then the deadly force would be justified. But again, specifics, the devil's always in the details. And sometimes it depends on who has the better attorney. But that's the general rule, is if a reasonable person in the same circumstance would have been afraid for their life, then deadly force is justified.
So then no imprisonment for the person who defended himself or herself and killed the assailant, correct?
Correct. And sometimes you may be charged, but, and it depends state to state as well, but at least for us, and I believe this is still the case, if our case is presented to a grand jury or 2 different grand juries and both grand juries fail to indict, then you cannot be brought up on that charge again. So if you were breaking into my house in a violent way, or you had assaulted me with deadly force and I defended myself and took your life as a result, they could charge me with homicide, and the grand jury says, nope, we're not going to indict. And then they present it to another grand jury and they said, no, then I can never be charged with that again.
Oh, okay.
The statute of limitations for homicide is for life. So if I take someone else's life, then for the rest of my life, without that ruling in place, I could be living in fear of being charged at some point.
Yeah.
So I hope that makes it clearer and not less clear, but it's another one of those kind of difficult to answer with a blanket answer.
Of course. And then just the last question. I mean, if you if you like to answer that, it's regarding, does the state of Georgia have capital punishment?
Yes.
Oh, it does. Okay, it's like California then.
Yeah.
I think half of states in the United States have capital punishment. Well, California, Texas, your state, okay, now I know that, I didn't know that, and some others, yeah.
And I'm not sure how many, but it's not very many people that the capital punishment actually gets carried through with. It's a couple a year per state, maybe, and most of those people have been filing court appeals for decades. It's rare. The feds use it on occasion, but I think it's been since, maybe even the Oklahoma City bombing that any kind of high profile federal prisoner's been put to death.
Yes. Okay.
It's very expensive to execute people.
Yeah, of course. And
So-
it doesn't differ from one state to the other, correct?
It does. Some places are, most of the states seem to be getting away from it because it's so expensive. There's such a vast amount of appeals and differing opinions and differing research on its effectiveness. But that's difference of opinions, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Of course, it's a very also controversial, emotional topic.
Very.
Absolutely. And this is, please correct me. Is it like in Florida? I don't know. They have a law where they can even defend themselves in their car, like their car is like their home, something like that. Most
of the court decisions say that your vehicle is an extension of your house.
Okay.
And that tends to be true, pretty broad interpretation. If most of your states are going to boil down to that one thing that we talked about earlier, and that is if a reasonable person under your same circumstance was in fear of receiving death or great bodily harm, then they have a right to use deadly force. That's probably the most generic way to state that. And so it comes down to that reasonable person standard, and you get in front of a jury, which is assumedly comprised of reasonable people, and they agree that you would have been afraid under those circumstances, then they have no choice but to say you're not guilty.
Okay. Yeah, of course. Of course. What is your personal opinion about civilian self-defense? Do you think civilians should be given more rights to defend themselves, or do you think it should be more restrictive or restricted?
Well, I think that anyone who is defending themselves has the moral high ground, because if I'm not assaulting you, then we should be able to sit and talk or do whatever we want, or I should be able to walk away, or you should be able to walk away. But once you have committed to perpetrating an act of violence on another human being, I think that you don't have ground to stand on at that point. That you have started the fight, and it's not only a right, but it's an obligation for the other person to do everything in their power to preserve themselves. Because otherwise you would be saying that some people are more valuable than other people.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that. So I am a strong proponent of self-defense. Now, once you've won the fight, this is something that seems to have changed generationally as well, is when I was growing up, you had a fist fight, and when the fight was over, there was a clear winner and a clear loser. Nobody went to their car and got a gun and started shooting. The guy who won didn't start stomping your face into the concrete. It was a fair fight.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, you have a right to defend yourself, and once you have defended yourself, then the fight should be over. If the bad guy chooses to start the fight again, then you have the right to defend yourself again. And, up to and including the use of deadly force. I don't have a problem as long as everything is done within the clearly established guidelines. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I understand that. Rich. Yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing regarding the state of Georgia, do you have also restriction on type of firearms people can buy? Of course, you cannot buy automatic weapons, correct? As a civilian.
You can, but there are restrictions. The restrictions for fully automatic weapons, for silencers, for dangerous weapons is what they call them, rocket launchers, flamethrowers, things like that. They are permitted for life to an individual, but you have to go through a complete background check, and you have to get a federal permit. And the federal permit, regardless of the destructive device, is a $200 fee. And right now it takes about a year to get the permit. But yes, I can own as many machine guns as I can afford if I get them all permitted. The problem is in 1986 that the federal legislature banned the production of new machine guns available to civilians and the importation. So every machine gun that I am allowed to own has to be manufactured prior to 1986. And that means that the prices have gone skyrocketing. In 1986, I could go and purchase a fully automatic version of any military weapon, and it would only cost me about the $200 permit price plus maybe another $50 to $100. So for an example, an M16 or an AR-15 that cost me $600 as a civilian for a semi-automatic version prior to 1986 would have cost me maybe $700 plus the permit, and I could buy as many of them as I wanted. Obviously a permit for each one though. Now an M16, if I wanted to purchase one, is probably going to be closer to $20,000.
Oh God, that's called skyrocketing, right?
Yeah. So I can go out and buy a semi-automatic version of the exact same gun for still, even now, the prices are a little bit up, but we're talking in the $700 to $900 range. But if I want the fully automatic version, I'm going to have to go spend probably $20,000 to maybe even $30,000 just on a single firearm. So that's one of the ways they've reduce the amount of people that have them.
Just the last question I would like to ask you. You know, people who have criminal records in the United States and go to jail or whatever, right? Do they lose their right to vote for the president of the United States as citizens?
Most states, if you are convicted of a felony, then you lose your right to vote. But there's a very strong movement to keep that from happening, because certain political parties like to accord as many votes as they can. And so there are avenues that you can go through legally that reinstate your rights. You can also, and it also depends on, you know, the felony itself, how long ago was it, these sorts of things. There's a thing in a lot of states called a first offender status that you have to go through a bunch of processes after you have been awarded the first offender status. And then once you finish your probationary period, then your felony conviction goes away. So that's one thing. Another way is some states will allow you to petition the courts for reinstatement of rights. And then you have to prove, you know, that you're a good citizen now. And, you know, why is it that we should give you back these rights that you forfeited by being convicted for your particular crime.
Okay, so I understood it correctly. So once you are convicted and you go to jail, you lose first the rights, right? Then that's the first thing. Okay, and it's independent of how long you served in prison, correct? Or
yeah, as long as it's a felony, and so that has to break that 1 year or $1,000 fine threshold.
That's right, a felony. It should be a felony, correct? Thank you very much. It was really, really lovely. Thank you very much. I think this clarifies, at least for me, not only for me, but clarified many issues. I really thank you for sharing your thoughts and also your experiences with us on this channel. Thank you very much, Rich. And
I'll help out anytime.
Yeah, thank you. We will surely come back to you. And I thank you for being here and wish you a nice day, Rich.
Same to you, Manusher. I appreciate it. Looking forward to talking to you again soon.